Good morning. A very warm welcome to all present here, especially a very warm welcome to Dr. Lani Peterson, Usha Venkatraman ma'am, Jyoti Pandey ma'am, Shalini Surve, Dr. A.K. Sen Gupta, Dr. Nitin Vazirani, our chairpersons of our program, faculty colleagues and my dear students. I, Suma Nair, on behalf of the SIS School of Learning and Leadership Development, SIS College of Management Studies, SIS School of Business Studies, welcome all of you for this wonderful program, Leading by Story. It's a privilege to have Dr. Lani Peterson with us. Thank you, ma'am, for accepting our invitation and being with us today. As we start all our session with an Indian tradition of lighting lamp, I request Dr. A.K. Sen Gupta sir, Dr. Lani ma'am, Usha Venkatraman ma'am, Jyoti Pandey ma'am, Nitin sir, so please come forward for lighting of lamp. I request Gaurav to evoke the prayer.
या कुन्देन्दु तुषारहार धवला या शुभ्रवस्तामृता या वीणावरदण्डमण्डितकरा या श्वेतपद्मासना या ब्रह्माच्युत शंकर प्रभृतिभिः दैवै सदा वन्दिता सा मां पातु सरस्वती भगवती निशेषजाड्यापहा निशेषजाड्यापहा.
Thank you, Gaurav. I request Dr. Lani to please come to the stage. I also request Dr. A.K. Sen Gupta to come to the stage. I request Dr. A.K. Sen Gupta to say a few words and take the session forward. Over to you, sir.
Good morning to all of you. See, Suma, my colleague, she welcomed on behalf of the units of the SIS. Let me try to welcome you on behalf of the mother, and that is the SIS Trust, the South Indian Education Society Trust, to this wonderful session today, which is being planned on the storytelling. Now let me tell you a couple of things that, as I told you yesterday also, some of you, that it's a grand occasion for all of you to understand the concept of the storytelling, not just storytelling as a technique, and that's why the madam Lani Peterson has also termed the session not in storytelling, but leading by story. That means how do you influence others through the stories. I think that's the more important thing. Storytelling happens to be a communication technique, but more important things is that how do I influence others? How do I make an impact? How do I communicate effectively to make others understand? Probably that's the importance of the storytelling in the contemporary world. In my generation, we grew up with storytelling. I still remember every night, either my mother or my grandmother telling a story to me. That had a lot of impact on me particularly, building my character. Because each of these stories, they are very, very small stories, maybe 3 minutes to 2 minutes, but each of the stories had a lot of meaning, a lot of moral involved in it. So the story ended with a concept. The story ended with a model that don't steal. Be a brave person. Be courageous. Tell others what you want to tell. Don't succumb to pressures, and so on and so forth. These were some of the models which I learned through my childhood, through the storytelling from my mother and my grandmother. I never had the concept of learning the storytelling in my teaching and training career because probably that was not the thing of the day. So we learned through the case studies, the simulation, the experiential learning, and so on and so forth, not through the storytelling. And therefore, once this concept came of the storytelling for the last, let's say, 1.5 to 2 decades, we are seeing the storytelling as of increasing importance in the education, right from the ECC time, and I'm talking early child education, right from the ECC time to the graduation and the post-graduation level, the storytelling has become an effective means of communication by the teachers to the students. But it has got a more important impact for the management student. That's why we have got a good number of management students over here, because the reason is that you are going to be the future leaders of the country. You are going to be the future, the corporate managers of the country. And therefore, you must know how to communicate with the people. Because that's at the end of the day, whatever you do, whatever the decision you take, what I have learned in my life is that if you're not in a position to communicate the way that you want to communicate, but at the same time trying to listen to the others also, you shall never be in a position to implement the decision. You may be an autocratic, but doesn't make any difference. So therefore, the storytelling becomes a very important thing for all of you as a management students. So I'm sure that today's session is going to be a very impactful session for all of you. Because to deliberate on this particular topic, you have a person with us who is a global renowned expert, who is a psychologist, who is an executive coach, and who has been in the area of the storytelling for a large number of decades, and dealing with the leading corporate, both in the domestic field and also in the international arena, particularly in the area of the technology, in the area of the medical science, in the area of the healthcare, and also in the area of the educational field. To give a name, for example, one of the clients she has dealt with is Google. To give you another name, another name is Novartis, one of the leading names in the medical field. So that shows the variety of the fields in which she has employed the storytelling technique in her storytelling career. I can't remember, the educational qualification because it's very difficult. She is a doctorate in psychology from the William James College. She is master's in counseling psychology from Lesley University. She holds a bachelor degree from the Smith College. She is a member of National Speaker Alliance. She is the National Storytelling Network. She is in the National Storytelling Network, and she serves on the executive committee of the Healing Story Alliance, which she also chaired for a period of 5 years. So it's a matter of privilege for all of us that she is with us today, and I am sure that during the next 2 hours, we are going to have an engrossing, absorbing, exciting, relevant, and a contemporary discussion on the thing of the future. Thank you, Madam. Welcome over here. May I request Dr. Nitin Vajalani to please come and felicitate Madam. I'll take 1 more minute. Please. We have also with us two of our colleagues with us, Mrs. Usha Venkataraman. And Mrs. Usha Venkataraman was the from the Storytelling Network, and she's the first person through whom we could get the contact of Lani Peterson. So may I request Suma to kindly felicitate Mrs. Usha Venkataraman. We also have with us Ms. Jyoti Pandey. Ms. Jyoti Pandey is all the way from Bhopal. She is also in the Storytelling Network, and she is a mentee of Lani Peterson, and therefore she is over here. May I request Dr. Swati Kulkarni to kindly felicitate her. We also have a third colleague. We will felicitate slightly later, a little bit later, because probably Suma might have run short of gifts. That could be the reason. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm sure that we are going to have an exciting and absorbing discussion. Madam, now the floor is open to you, and this is my mobile. Oh, that's you. Thank you.
And is there a way to adjust the slides? Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Forward and back. All right. Thank you so much. I am so grateful to be here with all of you today. What a beautiful introduction. Thank you so much, Dr. Gupta. Your traditions are beautiful. We have so much to learn from you in our country. And I will try to capture everything and bring it back. Is this one? So I want to begin by first, as well as thanking you for welcoming me in such a beautiful way, but tell you a little bit about my story and how I came to be here now doing this with you. It's been a long journey. But as Dr. Gupta said in my introduction, I started as a psychologist. And that was my early training. It began in my early 20s. And actually the work of a psychologist is, I realize now, just listening to people's stories. And they come to you with their stories where they are actually uncomfortable in their stories. They're not happy in their stories. They feel stuck in their stories and don't know how to move or to change. And the role of a psychologist is to listen in a way and reflect back that allows someone to see themselves in their stories in a different way, that allows them to move within them and have more potential to see who they can be in that. So without realizing it, I was being trained as a story listener very early on. And it's such a privilege to be able to sit with someone in their story, to listen deeply, to try and understand who they are now, but who they want to be, and what needs to happen to get them from here into that new place. And that's about story change. We are essentially our stories. Our stories about ourselves can either empower us to continue to grow, or they can limit us and keep us stuck. So I'm grateful for that early beginning. There was a period after my training, and I practiced both in individual clinic as well as in a hospital setting for a while, but I began to start my family. And I had 4 children in a short time. 2 were adopted from Korea, 2 are birth children of my own. They all came into our life within 5 years, and I was overwhelmed and I needed to take a step back. So I became a speaker and a facilitator of how to create positive change in one's life. So I went and began to speak. What I realized is that some people were coming back to hear me several times give the same lecture. And I thought, ooh, I'm either not very good at this, or there's something that they're seeing that I don't see. So someone who came the third time to hear the same talk, I said, why are you here again? And she said, will you tell stories? And each time you tell a story, I understand more deeply what it is you're talking about. Other people give lectures and give all facts, and it's hard for me to hold on to them. So I think I come because you're a storyteller. And that was a whole different idea for me. And I started to think, what is this about story? Storytelling, story listening, that's so powerful that people go deeper within, connect on a deeper level, understand things in new ways. So I started to study storytelling. This was in the 90s, the late 90s. And I wanted to learn all about it. So I actually started to write my own stories and go in performing around both my country. And I've been very privileged to travel across my country doing performing. And then I started to think there's something more than just storytelling and story listening. How do I put my psychology together with my storytelling to actually use it intentionally to help people grow and understand more about who they are as well as who others are as a means for all of us to do bigger and better things. And with that, I began to learn about coaching and this idea of story as the heart of understanding who we are, who others are, and together moving forward into a vision that can bring us both to a new place. So that's what today is about, and I hope to share some of what I know, and I hope some of it will be new for you. I know that you've all been learning and understanding this for a long time, but I hope that I can deepen some of your understanding. And I also hope that together we might do some exercises, and so that you can experience it from the inside out. So this is what we're going to think about today. So raising our awareness about story as a leadership tool. What is a story? Anyway, we take it for granted sometimes we know that, but let's look at what is a story. Why do we use it? When do we use it? How do we use it? And so we're going to begin to really intentionally break these things down so that we can use them well as we move forward. So I want to introduce to you someone that perhaps you're all familiar with. This is one of my heroes, and from my country. It was a president in the 60s, John F. Kennedy. He once said that the only reason to ever give a talk is to change the world. He believed that deeply. And I believe that that's true too. Why else would we devote this kind of time of being together unless in our deepest parts we want things to change, to be better, not only for ourselves but for others? So the idea of a presentation, of a communication of any kind, there's always three things happening. The first is we're informing, we're sharing facts, information with another. We're also, I think whether we're aware of it or not, we're trying to influence. We're trying to have somebody see something differently by what we're saying to bring them to a new and different place. And ultimately, we need to engage, because if we're not engaging somebody, then in fact, they're not going to be paying attention, they're not going to be open to what's happening, they're not going to move with us to a different place. So what can do all those things to inform, to influence, and to engage? That is story. It's very, very powerful. We begin storytelling and story listening as children. We think of it as a children's thing, but in fact, it's a powerful leadership tool. When I first started doing this work early in 2000, in my country, people didn't understand story and what it could be. They thought it was a children's thing. So when I started to bring it into organizations, I didn't even use the word story. I had to call it narrative skills. And that was the only way they would open the door for me to come. But now story is understood and its power, and people say, no, I want story. Story is different from narrative. It is unique, and we'll talk about what differentiates it. But first I want to share a little bit about some of the applications that might be in your work as you think about, so where can I use story? So it is about leadership presence, how we connect with another in a meaningful level and way, how we also build credibility, how you understand who I am in my story, and so you want to listen to my story. That's what a leader does. They've built that kind of credibility that people want to listen to the stories that they're telling. Another is when we're trying to build a team, when we're trying to inspire others to be motivated, to come together to both learn and sometimes unlearn, which is equally as important when we have habits that are not helpful to us or moving in directions that aren't getting us where we want to go. We have to sometimes learn new things and unlearn old habits, old ways of being. And story can be a means to help us do that. It's also a way that we can address conflict and guide us towards resolution. Story has a means and a way of being objective, that when one hears a story, they bring themselves to it and hear what they need to hear in it, and stories can thereby convey ethics, morals, ideas in a way that if you just heard from someone say, you need to do that, you'd think, who are you to tell me that? But if I convey those same ideas in a story, one is open to listen and hear them in a way that they can take it in and perhaps move differently. So stories are about change. A story itself is change. We're going to talk a lot more, but if there's nothing that changes, it's actually not a story. It's a list or a chronology. There is something that you set the context in the beginning, and in the middle something happens, and at the end you're in a different place. That's what change is. And therefore stories can be our guides as we are trying to bring about change in the work that we do. Stories are about how we also capture knowledge, how we contain it, how we hold it, how we share it. So there's a story that I learned from Dr. Howard Gardner, a professor at Harvard University, wrote a book about the mind. He was one of the first to look at multiple intelligences and the different ways of being. He told a story about his early research work at Harvard University where he's trying to understand how do people learn. So he went into a freshman level class that was in the physical sciences. And with his experiment, he actually gave the final exam on the first day. You think, oh, that's not very fair, is it? No. But all these students on the first day took the final exam as if they'd had the whole course. And of course, no one did very well because they hadn't had the course yet. What he found is that most of them had about an elementary school understanding of the physical sciences, what they had learned and experienced in the world about how things work in science. They all then took the full semester course. They took the final exam at the end of the year, and as you would hope from Harvard freshmen, they did very, very well. They completed the exam with very high marks. He waited 4 years. Right before they graduated, he pulled together that class again and gave them the final exam again. And except for those few students who had majored in that subject, almost all the other students tested back at elementary school level. What happened? Where did all that knowledge go? They seemed 4 years ago they understood it. What he came to realize is that they had been given a lot of facts, and they had memorized those facts for the exam, and they had passed the exam, but they hadn't taken that knowledge down deep, and in fact, they hadn't changed their stories inside about understanding physical science and how it works. So Dr. Gardner went on to talk about how education needs to be embedded in story, because we arrive with stories of how we think things work, and we're going to hold on to those stories that we're given facts, but if the facts don't fit in with our stories, we somehow can't hold on to those facts. The way we remember things is when those facts become stories within us, and those stories make more sense than what we already knew, and we have a way to capture that, to archive it within us, and to retrieve it so that we're actually growing in our understanding. So he began to create curriculum where story was the basis of conveying new information. So as I say, in organizations, when we convey our new ideas in story, it sticks and we understand it and we can retrieve it and hold on to it. Articulating a vision. When we're trying to think about not only who we are now and what's important to us, but where we want things to go, that's imagination. It hasn't been created yet. So how do we do that? We create a vision story, a story of what things can be like if we do these things. So we'll talk later today about what does a vision story look like? What are the elements of it? And how do we move forward in that way? Mentoring others. When we are trying to hold and help others, we can teach them all kinds of things like a teacher, but if we share our stories of how we learned, how we grew, and equally important in mentoring is to ask the questions of others that lead them to connect to the stories about what they already know, and then they're realizing who they are and what already skills, capabilities they have that they can start to believe it. So a mentor not only tells stories, but asks the questions that bring the right stories out of those they are trying to help. So I'm going to talk a lot today about not just storytelling. I think that that's 20% of what we need to be doing. 80% is story listening of others and to learn first about who they are, what they see, what's important to them, and then we know what stories we need to tell them in order to connect and bring them closer to where we are so that together we can move into a new story, a better, richer story. When you're trying to develop your staff, this is all very similar, but when you're bringing someone new into your organization, into your team, what stories do they need to know about who each of you is individually? Who are you together? What makes you a team? What are the visions that you have for the work you want to do together? They need to hear these stories in order to be part of you, in order to be part of a team. So the quickest way to orient another is to tell them the stories about who you are, what's important to you, why you are the team that you are, and what you want to achieve together. And lastly, and this is what people often think about for storytelling, is I'm trying to sell an idea to another, marketing. Storytelling is at the heart of marketing and selling. For me, that is one small piece. What's most important is who we are as leaders, as people who are trying to achieve something new. What is the story we stand in? What is the story that fuels our values, our beliefs about what's important to us? Why are we doing the work that we're doing? And where do we want that story to go? So story, for me, is always about understanding ourselves, understanding each other, and where do we want to move together? And understanding that the way that we move is through the stories that we share and tell. So in organizations, there's a few stories that I think are sort of foundational stories that I want to speak about. You'll also see in the slide that there's a small red number up in the right-hand corner. You will be receiving handouts at the end of this workshop today. Everything that's on these slides will be in your handouts, and these are the page that correlates with the slide in your handouts. So I know I see some of you taking notes. You'll have so much of this information in your hands at the end of this workshop. So different story types. The first are, I call identity stories. Those are the stories about who we are, how we came to be who we are, and what makes us unique. Because if you are telling the same story that every other organization is telling, why would anyone come to you as opposed to them? So to be grounded in those stories of who we are now, that will create excitement about that. Then there are the founding stories of how we became who we are. And I think that that's part, again, of how we orient others. But it's important to know, as I told you my foundational story today, how I became the one doing this work, that's part of building credibility also. It's not just who I am now, but all the steps I took to become who I am. And therefore, that also is giving insight to what's important to me and why I'm doing what I'm doing. Then there are the defining stories. As I said, that who we are, but what makes us successful. So to look at, what are we proud of? What have we done that, that we want you to know about? And that's part of, again, building credibility, but also selling who I am and what I'm about, where I'm headed. So where I'm headed also is the visionary stories. Not only who I am and where I am, but where I'm going and why that's important to me. So what are the stories about the direction I'm headed and who I want to be part of that, what I want to create that's new, that's exciting, that's different, why that's important, who needs that as well, where am I bringing this change that I am initiating? And then lastly, there's the leadership stories of how we got here, and to be always capturing those stories of our success, of the work we've done. When I've worked in organizations, I not only teach them the skill, but I encourage them to build story banks. Those moments where you feel like you have done something unique, touched another's life, been successful. Capture those stories, write them, speak them, interview others who have been impacted by the work that you've done, and hold those so that you at different times can bring them out in the right moment to remember them, to share them, to teach others about who you are and what's important to you. So these are the various types. Almost all stories, I feel, in organizations fall into one of these areas that we're speaking about. But ultimately, it's about you staying curious about what are the stories I need to hear, what are the stories in me that others need to hear, when do I bring the right story at the right moment to move things forward. And so it begins continually asking the questions that make a story what it is, the who, what, when, where, and how. That's the essence of what's answered in a good story. So I want to pause for a moment, in that I'm always eager to hear from you, if there's questions, if there's thoughts, if there's something that you'd like to hear more of before I move in more deeply. You want to hear a story? There's going to be stories, many stories coming. So I have one that's coming in a little bit, but perhaps I'll share it now because there's been a request, because it ties into this a little bit. So this is an ancient story of a traveling monk who is on a walkabout, going from village to pray, to share his wisdom. And one evening when he arrived late at the gate of yet another city, he found that the gates were closed and there was a guard outside. And the monk just bowed deeply and said, I am here, can you give me entry? And the guard said, wait, who are you? Where are you from? Where are you going? And why are you going there? The monk had never been asked anything like this before, and paused and breathed and said, excuse me, sir, could you please repeat those questions? The guard once again said, who are you? Where are you from? Where are you going? And why are you going there? Oh, the monk took these in, paused, and then asked the guard a question. May I ask you, sir, how much do you get paid a month? And then the guard was taken aback and said, excuse me? How much do you get paid a month? He said, I get paid 30 rupees a month to stand here and ask those questions. Ah, the monk said, I am so glad. I will pay you 31 rupees a month if you stop me every day and ask me those same questions. They are so important. Thank you, sir. Those are the questions we need to be continually asking. So let me tell you why. The why is how our brains work. So this is a little bit of neuroscience, and please add in and correct me if I get anything wrong here. But our brains on storytelling. We have two parts of the brain that are our communication centers, one that receives, one that sends out our communications. When we are working just in the lines of fact or dialogue that is not story-based, those are the only two areas that light up. As soon as we move into story, 7 or 8 parts of our brain light up, because when we hear a story, what happens is it's as if we ourselves are there in that experience. So we start to light up both sides of the brain. Our senses become alive. We start to see things, to smell things, to feel things in a story. Stories not only touch the brain, they touch the heart. So we are opening our brain on multiple levels and factions that actually allow us to be connecting in a very different kind of way. So additionally, what the brain does is when it takes in any facts or moments of experience, it is a meaning-making machine, and it wants to make sense out of what it is seeing. So it ties together the familiar with the unfamiliar in order to understand this moment, and it does it in story form. So this is how we are each unique. We are all in this room having what we think is the same experience, but in fact, every one of you is having a very different experience of this moment right now because of who you uniquely are. Everything that has happened to you has moved first through your brain stem, your amygdala, which decides, is this moment safe or unsafe? It's your protector system. And the way that it decides whether this moment is safe or unsafe is it filters this moment through every other story you have lived and puts it up like a computer. It does this in an instant and says, oh, this is like that. I have sat in this room before. I have heard someone like this before. I think this is good. I'll stay. That happened in an instant for you even to make the decision to come. And if it did not feel right, if it did not feel like this could be helpful to me, or if you get here and you think, this woman doesn't know what she's talking about, you'd be finding ways to make your exit to the door. What one might be a treasure for one person, someone will leave today saying, oh, that was so helpful. One of you will leave today saying, that was a waste of time. It's the same lecture. You are different. I cannot know or meet all your needs. I can just bring you me and share what I have, and each of you will make sense and meaning of this in your own way. It's the way that the brain takes care of us. But in fact, well, let me tell you first, because I'm going to take this deeper about how change happens or how we get stuck in one meaning of something, because that's the essence of why we need to tell stories. But what's a story? So let's pause now in the brain and think for a moment what actually a story is. So my daughter teaches a 2nd grade, and I know she covers this, so I suspect all of you from the time you were little had some knowledge of what a story is. There's 3 parts. The 3 parts are beginning, middle, and yes. Oh, but so much is going on in each of those parts. So the beginning is setting a context of what things are like or what they used to be like. So you can start, say, the story of your life on the day you were born, or the day your parents were born, or your grandparents were born, or your great-grandparents were born, or the beginning of time and man. Your story could start anywhere. You are always making a decision anytime you tell a story. For this audience, what do they need to know to start? So that's your context. That's the beginning of who is this about? When did it start? Where did it begin? Who are the other characters? What do you need to know before actually the story really begins? So the story doesn't really start until the point of change. That's when you move out of what is called the old normal, what things were like, to all of a sudden something happens that brings you into the middle of a story. So in my story of the monk, you could say, once there was a monk, and every day he traveled to a different city, and until one day the door was locked. A point of change. That's when all of a sudden, now we're in the middle of the story. So if you just went, the monk traveled every day, he went to different places, he prayed every day, and that's what he did, that's not a story. That's a list of things. The story is he met a soldier who led him to look inside himself in all of a sudden a new way, and he was changed by that, and the soldier was changed by that. So the middle is where the point of change is when something puts you in the middle. The middle is then when there are turning events, when often there's an obstacle. You can't come in this door until you answer these questions. There are things that are demanded of the main character to meet those events. There's things that are happening with extra characters in the story that impact both the main character as well as sometimes themselves. Until you get to resolution, the third part. What's different now? If, again, what has changed? Change is what happens outside of you. What's different now? Transformation is what happens inside of you. And oftentimes, you may not even see the change on the outside. It looks the same. A monk comes to a gate, he enters, he's in a new city. But what's different inside? That's where also the learning comes. Every story, if we pause and look within what's different between the beginning and the end, there is learning. There is wisdom. There is possible of insight that if we take it in, can lead our own lives to have change within them. So many people tell stories back and forth. Put the pause in place and say, what is this story about? Where is the learning for me within it? And once you have that, then you think, who else could benefit from this story? When do I tell it? Where do I tell it? How can this story help me and another get to a different and new place? So let's go back now to our brains on story. As I said, all of our lived experience is held within us, and it is what keeps us safe. It's also what can empower us to do new things. It's also what can keep us stuck and limited when we think, this is how things are. This is how things should be done. This is the way it is. There's no growth in that. So when we have a story, we make meaning of it. That leads us to emotion. We have feelings about that meaning. We store that in our memory. And then that leads ourselves to behave in certain ways. So our stories are what impact our behavior. And they can be, if we're not thinking, a reaction, because we always react this way when this happens, or if we pause and question the meaning and deepen that meaning in ourselves, it can actually lead to informed response. And it is that response that actually deepens relationship. So we don't see things as they are in this world. We see them as we are, which is why each of you is seeing something different in everything that you do. So I'm going to give you a metaphor. Do you have these in your country for your children? Legos are the little ones, Duplos are the big ones. So if you were to think of these as facts or moments, when we just hand these to people, we think, we're giving them lots of information. But in fact, in our own heads, we've already put meaning to this. We've built something. And we see it in that way, but we hand them this and say, do you see? And they say, oh yes, I see. Just what you say. No, no one can ever see it your way. So the more you put it together, actually this last piece, as many different people in the room will be as many different constructions as you have. But the more that you actually put it together, put the facts in a story and hand the finished piece to somebody, the closer, they'll never have it exactly, but the closer they will have to what you are trying to show them. So often I work in organizations, Dr. Gupta mentioned Novartis. Novartis is one of my largest clients. I work with scientists who work in this realm of facts and data and information. And they say, I go into meetings and I give them that and they don't understand it. Or they say, no, I'm not going to invest in you because I don't see it. How do I help them to see it? And I said, you have to tell that facts in a story about not what it is, but what it does, what it can do, the change that it can create in this world. Whose lives will be touched by this? How will those lives be touched? It's bringing this important information. I never want to diminish the facts, but what I want to help them do is to share those facts in a way that what I have built is you can see it, and therefore you are making the best decision about what it is I am saying, and not making a decision based on something that actually has very little to do with me and what I share. Stories we are told from the time that we're little, and sometimes those stories impact how we see things before we've even had the experience. So we think we know whether something is good or bad before we've ever met a snake. So this is partly my experience. I don't like snakes. I'm scared of snakes. I've never met a snake. Why? It is because of stories I've been told, of movies I've seen, of pictures I'm shown, that I have this fear. So when I see a snake, the reason I've never met a snake up close is if I get close, I run away. So what we see depends on what we look for. And that is why we have to challenge our own thinking all the time, because we may be running away from things that are actually could be gifts for us. We make judgments very quickly. We make judgments before we even know we have done it. Another story from my experience. I do this work in corporations with executives, with leaders. I also do this work with the incarcerated and with the unhoused, because I believe this is my service work. I believe that their stories have been marginalized, that they themselves are sitting in a very thin story that others have told about who they are and what they've done or what they can do, which keeps them stuck in those places. So I lead workshops both in prisons as well as in shelters. And I was leading a story workshop in a shelter of young men who all lived on the street. And in our first time coming together, I would always say, we need to create this as a safe circle. So what do we do now to make this safe? And they would say things like, this has to be confidential. What's said in the room will stay in the room. We need to speak honestly. And always someone will say, no judging here. And I thought, that makes sense. Until one day, in this circle while we were putting these ideas out, one young man said, if there's no judging here, I'm leaving. I said, excuse me? Why would you go? And he said, because you're asking me to do something that's impossible. And I will not say I can do something I can't do. We all judge. He said, actually, it's my judging that keeps me alive on the street. I need to judge what's safe, what's not safe. And that's when I realized that's what our brains do. every moment they're saying, this is good, that is bad, this is good, that is bad. So I said, you're right, we judge. So how do we create a safe space here knowing we judge? He said, we have to continually monitor our judgments and own them so that they don't keep us from listening to each other. And that when we judge, to say, can I put this aside for a moment and truly connect with this person? Can I own it and then put it aside? And if I can't, then I need to speak it and to say, this thought is coming between me being able to connect with you. I need to talk about this first so that I can then truly listen. So he brought my work to a much deeper level. And now I know how much work I need to continually do to pause, to question what is coming up for me now with this person. What stories am I telling myself about them and who they are and what they can or can't do before I've even heard them? That's part of storytelling. We tell ourselves stories all the time. When do those stories actually keep us from truly connecting with another, from understanding another, from going deeper ourselves? So I call these thin stories, where we get stuck. So there's an old story from, it says it goes back to Buddha. That's probably apocryphal. But it's a story about a cow that is inside a gate, and he keeps wandering around and around inside the gate, and he can't get out. Tell me, how can we let the cow out of the gate? So people start to say things like, open the door. And he says, no, the cow won't go. Oh, lift him up. No, he's too heavy, he won't go. Anything you say, it's no, it cannot happen. And then you realize, where is the cow stuck? Stuck in my brain. I can get the cow out. All I have to do is imagine it. I need to tell a different story. I need to let it happen in a different way. So how do we do this? How do we move from a thin story to what I call a thick story? A thin story, we're going to go back to my earlier picture where you connect the dots and there's just one line and this happened and so this is what's true. That's a thin story. Life is not thin. There are so many variables. There's so many cause and effects. There are so many things that go into making any one thing happen. And the more we question what else is true, not is this true? Yes, what else is true? Tell me more, then we move from a thin understanding to a thicker and thicker understanding. We're not actually changing the story because that first understanding is in there. What we're doing is we're expanding our meaning and our understanding to hold so much more. And when we do that, there's more potential for ourselves as well as for each other. So the way that we do that is actually by pausing. So that bottom line, there's something that happens, we make meaning, we have emotion about what meaning we've made, and then it leads us to react. So you think, oh, he handed me this meal. I don't like this meal. He's not thinking of me. It makes me angry. I'm rejecting this. That happens in a second. As opposed to if we, at that line, instead of moving right to reaction, we pause, we listen to why right now am I seeing it this way? Why am I feeling this way? So first, what is the story I am telling myself in this moment about this? And then to ask the questions, what was the intent of other? What were they trying to do for me? How do they see it? How do they understand it? And through that, to challenge the initial meaning I've made of it. And as we do, what happens is the story changes in us. The emotions then change in us, and the ability to respond, to choose a response, as opposed to just reacting in the moment to the first story we have a much thicker story that gives us many more ways to actually respond that actually can change the nature of the interaction and therefore the relationship. So the goal is actually to get as much information as we can to make sure we have the thickest story possible that we are either receiving or sharing. So here is another method of, one thing I want to say about this. When we choose our response, as opposed to just react is something we do habitually without thinking. When we pause and get the fuller story and choose our response, that is responsibility. That's the essence of leadership, is holding and creating the largest story possible between us, whether it's whether it's within myself, with me and another, with me and a team, with me in an organization, with me and a client. That's the goal. What are the stories that are being told? Where are they thin? How do we thicken them? How do we strengthen the story that we are building together? So part of that responsibility begins with the pause. And I want to introduce to you this model. And how many of you are familiar with Johari's window? Look at that. You're doing such wonderful work here. I do this, and American everyone goes, what is this? So I'll move very quickly through it then. You know the parts. And this first part, what's known to myself and known to others, that's common knowledge. But what's not known to others but to myself, that's the hidden place, the private place. We all have a large private inside. We can't possibly share it all, but we keep a lot private that perhaps could be helpful. So the third area, what others see that I don't, that's we're blind to. That's what the judgments that other people are making in every moment about us that we think, this is going delightfully, and actually they're angry or whatever. We're blind to that. So the work is to move into this fourth area, which is, I put it in green, that's where growth happens. That's the thicker story that we're trying to create. The way that we get there, how do we get there? Using this model, we have to share what's private and bring it out. We need to say what I'm thinking. How do I see this? What is the story I am telling or holding so that others can know the stories that I have? We also need to listen. We need to expand our blind area. So often we think they need my wisdom, they need my stories, they need to know what I know. No, we need to hear them. Stephen Covey has said, seek first to understand before being understood. That's moving through that blind spot. So the more we share, the more we listen, the more what is unknown decreases, and the larger the story we have in common. And that's the goal. It's not to stand in my story and you stand in yours, but to build a story together in that way. So when we do that, let me show you what that looks like. So it's back to this. This is perhaps a thin story. It's one meaning. When we start to listen, we start to tie this thin story to other stories, and actually what happens is we begin to get a thicker, larger story that holds more cause and effects, more variables, more knowledge, and therefore more potential in it. And when we continue to do that about the things that we hold, we actually can have a very different experience with things that perhaps we might never have experienced before. So leadership responsibility with story is how we listen, when we speak, how we speak, and what we speak. And what we speak is what actually enables us to all bring each other together. So I could have started here, let's talk about story, but I wanted you to understand what happens in our brains, where we get caught in stuck stories, how those limit us when we think we are the expert. we should always be trying to move to a thicker story that can hold all of us together. So I want to talk just for a moment about presence and influence and how they tie to story. As I mentioned, I do some work in homeless shelters. There's a I live in Boston. There's a very large women's shelter. 300 women live there. And we went through a very dark experience in our city where some of the services were all shut down because of, it's a longer story, they were all out on an island and there was a bridge to the island and the bridge was no longer safe. So overnight, a place where everyone could go to get mental health support, physical support, all kinds of things were all of a sudden no longer available to them. So the unhoused, the homeless in our city were suffering. It was winter. We had several feet of deep snow. And I was hired by a group of ministers to walk the streets and to pull people together into warming houses and to let them talk, to share their stories. So I was hired as a story listener and to capture their stories and then bring them to different organizations within Boston. So I coached them in their stories to tell their stories to the leaders in our city, in government, in areas of power, what's happening to them, so that their stories could make a difference, to change hearts, to get services to happen, because all those who were in their warm houses didn't know what it was like for those who were no longer being held with services on the street. So this women's shelter said, would you come in and do an hour workshop for our women in telling their stories? And I said, I'd be delighted to. So I came and I offered this as a service. And at the end of the hour, they said, oh, we want more. Will you come do a 4-hour workshop for our women? And I said, I'd be glad to. And I came back. I did a 4-hour workshop. And at the end, they said, oh, no. This is leadership. Will you run a leadership institute here at this homeless shelter for our women? Because I think that having them tell and hear stories will change their lives and empower them. I said, a leadership institute? Let's try. So in our first gathering, I had 12 women around a circle, all of whom were mothers, had no homes of their own. They were in the shelter for a period until they could try and make their lives different. So I said, so what's leadership? And they all just looked at me and I said, any ideas? I'm figuring this out too. What does leadership mean to you? And someone said, you have to show up. I said, yes, that's leadership, showing up. What does that mean? And as we talked about showing up, we came to understand presence. Deep presence, how to be present within yourself. So I even began to ask, what does presence, let me go here, what does presence mean to you? Because before you ever open your mouth to speak, to tell a story, first you have to show up. What does that look like? What does that feel like? So think about somebody in your life who you feel has presence. Just for a moment, imagine that person. What is it like to be with them? And share with me, please, if you would, some adjectives, some words of what it's like to be with someone who shows presence. Calm. There's a calmness. Yes. Beautiful. What else? Say again? Supported. You feel supported in that. Calm, supported. Thank you. Say again? Valued. You feel valued by them. You're confident. Yes. Secure. Beautiful. How about this side? I realize I'm not looking at you enough. Hello. Yes. Love. Love. You feel love in their presence. It's about how not only what they are exuding, it's what you receive when somebody has presence. You feel secure held. It actually builds your confidence because you feel valued and loved. So as a leader, how do we show up with this kind of presence that another will then open to us, to join us, to bring their best to us? So these women helped me understand that. And I said, so yes, presence, what else? Well, they said, once you show up, you have to do something. Ah, what do you do? They said, well, I guess it depends on what's needed to be done. They had it. That's influence. Deciding what needs to be done and bringing the influence that others are willing to come with you to do what needs to be done, to move together in that direction. So how does story fit into that? So I talk about story intelligence. It's the relationship between someone who's speaking, someone who's listening, and the message that brings one to this different place. So how many are familiar, I'm sure many, with emotional intelligence and what that is? Raise your hand if you know the concept of emotional intelligence. So let me speak to it just a little bit and how story fits into this. So emotional intelligence is 3 parts. And they say that actually mental intelligence is part of your DNA, and you can increase your learning, but you can't increase necessarily your capacity for learning. But none of us use our full capacity anyway. Emotional intelligence is learned. It's learned from the time you enter this world and being in the presence of others. We learn how to connect, how to relate, how to be in relationship. That's what emotional intelligence is. It begins first with knowing self. Who am I? What's important to me? What do I feel about this? And what does that lead me to do? So if we think, going back to stories we're talking about, when something happens, I make meaning of it, I have an emotion, and I do something. Well, the more that we understand ourself, the more we then have control over our response. Oh, I'm feeling this in this moment because that once happened to me, or I was told that, and that's leading me to see it this way and behave this way. But is that helpful right now? That's emotional intelligence, is putting that pause in place, knowing self, and then knowing other. What are they bringing right now? What meaning are they making? What are they feeling? Why are they telling me this story? What are they trying to accomplish in this moment? And then bringing self and other through their message and your message to a new story, a bigger story that can hold both of you. So the parts are, first, knowing self. What are the stories you use to guide yourself? And these can be both the stories in your life, but also the traditional tales. What stories are you attracted to actually tell another? So many storytellers in our circle, in our lives, they have millions of stories to choose from, but they don't just come and tell you any story. They choose the stories that are meaningful to them, that speak to them, that they think have value. So it's knowing, why do I tell these stories? Why are these ones important to me? Why do I want others to know them? So what are the stories that you use to guide you? What are the stories that you tell other? And what are the values you know are in those stories? And why are those your values? Why do you hold those as meaningful to yourself? That's part 1. Part 2 is, if you stop there, it's all about you, and you will miss connecting to other. So you need to be listening to, who are they? What are the stories that you're listening for in them? As well as, what are the stories you elicit from them? That's by the questions you ask. Whenever you ask a question, you're actually initiating a story in someone else. So why are you asking this question? What story do you want? And why do you want that story? So you need to be clear, because otherwise it's just self-indulgence. But actually, by asking a question and initiating a story, this is mentoring. How is that story helpful to the storyteller to be bringing up right now? And how is it helpful to you? And how is it helpful to what you want to have happen together, what you're achieving? So lastly, what is important to know about them before you begin to talk? So the message is about, again, creating a thicker story together. So I want to just pause at this place because now we're going to go into the influence part. But this is all about presence. It's knowing who I am, what's important to me, who is this person, who are they, why are they important to me, why should they listen to me, why do I want to listen to them, and what is the story we're trying to build together. That's presence. We'll go on in a moment to talk about now the story itself and influence, but first I want to just pause and listen to anything that you want to share as either a reflection, an insight you've had so far, so that we can all share that, or if you have a question about what I've shared so far. I've spoken for an hour. I apologize. I get passionate. So I want to pause and hear from you for a moment. And I'll have a drink of water. Reflections, questions. Please.
I am Aditya from MMS first year. So what I wanted to say is, in India we have very rich culture of stories, and there are many stories which influence our society from many centuries.
Yes.
So I could relate to it that those stories not only affect individuals but also change the course of history, and how strong and how influential and effective the stories are. And I had one question, that is, the thicker the story gets, doesn't it get more difficult and complicated to understand and interpret? It was just my question.
Actually, thank you, first of all, for your reflection. And part of why I'm here is because of the rich culture and tradition of stories that are here. You have a wealth of stories that contain everything you need to guide you and others to where you hope to get. So by thicker story, I don't mean more complicated, I mean truer. And by truer, what I mean is we all have our own truths, dependent on who we are and how we see things, but it's only ours. And so our stories that we have within us are often limited. And so what a thicker story is actually bringing more understanding, richer insight to the stories that we have. So even if you were to tell a traditional tale, to then spend time and hear, what did everyone hear in that story? You think, oh, I heard this, but you heard that. That's helpful. And what did you hear? So the story itself might not change. It's our understanding of the story that gets thicker and therefore gives us more from it. It's richer in that way. And that's the way that Johari's window comes in. This is what I hear and see. What do you hear and see? How do you make meaning of this? And how are you changed by it? What will you do now that this story is in you? And with that, you have so much more to work with, so many more ideas than if it was just your own understanding of it. So that's what I mean by that. Thank you. Any other questions or reflections? Yes, please.
One reflection that I got was the power of storytelling. It has the power to build a narrative and to convince and make the other person understand what we are trying to say.
Yes.
So it's an art which can be used to influence the crowd or the people whom we are addressing.
Absolutely. That is the essence of it. And it is an art. We do it naturally all the time, but when you pause and do it intentionally and think, Who am I as the teller? Who is this as the listener? What are they already knowing, thinking? What are their ideas? And how do I want to change their understanding? And how do I do that through a story? When you do that intentionally, then your impact is so much greater. And so often when we're just in dialogue and we're just trying to convince somebody, they're trying to convince us back. And so it's like this. But a story actually opens that up and allows everybody to enter it in a different way that actually brings you to a new place so much more quickly. So let me share this idea of influence. Aristotle, he wrote The Art of Persuasion thousands of years ago. He talked about how do we influence another? And he said, all right, there's 3 ways that we influence another. Are these familiar to people, these words? So you've been so well educated. It's impressive. So just so that we're all on the same page, ethos, our ethics, our values, that's how we influence others. That's our presence. That's what do we stand in? What do we stand for? That other people can feel that in us. Pathos, like passion. What do we care about? What's in our hearts? Why do we care about this? And then lastly, logos, our ideas. And of these, logos is the smallest in terms of influence. We think we just keep coming with a better argument, but no. When we stand in our ethos and share our pathos, it opens others to our ideas, our words, our logic. Story is a shortcut because it holds all 3 of those in one. It brings you there more quickly. The story contains the ethos, the pathos, and the logic that's there in it. So I want to open us to storying your journeys, because this is part of presence, of knowing your own leadership journey. So this was the story I was going to tell you here about the guard at the gate, but you've heard it now. So to just talk about what a journey is. A story is actually a journey. When someone tells you a story, they're taking you from where the context they set to a new place, and you don't know where you're going. And that's when it's a great story. It's like, where's this going next? The suspense. What's happening now? Where's she leading me? Oh. So it goes from the I know this to I don't know this to I'm glad I know this now at the end. James Baldwin is one of our authors, but he said a journey is called that because you cannot know what you will do with what you find or what you find will do to you. So we are always through stories. We are creating our meaning making through our evolving story, and that at the same time is how we're interpreting what's coming next, and therefore we are both creating and being created simultaneously by every story we hear and tell. We are just walking stories in evolution. And so to be aware of what story am I standing in? Is it helpful to me or not? Is it thin or thick? Can it be helpful to another? And why do I want to tell it, and for what purpose, and where am I going with it? So it begins, in fact, with understanding in emotional intelligence who I am in my story. So I want you to, for a moment, have a little bit of a storytelling experience. To find, turn to a partner, and hopefully there's a partner for everyone. Some, it might be 3 for some, and I know there are others in another room, so please do it wherever you are. But I want you to think about, why are you here? So to start, why are you in this room right now? Why are you studying here in this school? Why are you studying the work that you're doing? What led you to this story? And where do you want this story to go? It's big, but this is important for you to ground yourself to know why you're doing what you're doing. So think about for a moment, all right, where did this story begin? Did it begin because of my parents who actually the work that they do, that I learned about it early on, or am I doing something very different from my family? How did I learn about this work and this school? Was it from a teacher or a mentor or a friend or a parent? When was the first time I knew that this is where I wanted to come to study, and why? And so how does all of this then fit into your personal mission statement, which is your values of why you're doing what you're doing, as well as your vision story? What do you want in your life? Where is it going? This is how you get the story of who I am, and then you are ready to listen to the story of who other is, and then you put the two together. What can we do together to move towards our common vision? But you need a personal mission and vision first to get there. So we're going to take 10 minutes total, so 5 in each direction, and I want you to listen to each other. And let me just also see, yes. So I want to share one more thing before we break, which is how to be a witness to another. This is story listening. We're used to being in dialogue, which is you talk, then I talk, you talk, I talk. And oftentimes we're not even listening, we're planning our next response. So we miss so much. So you'll each have a chance to tell your story, but when you are listening, I invite you to be a devoted story witness. So you're listening on 3 levels. Think of the ethos, pathos, logos. The logos, your head, you're listening. So what are this person's most important messages? What do I hear about what's of value to them? What do they care about? Their story will reveal that. They don't have to say, I care about. When you hear them tell their story, it's in it. It's in the story. As I'm listening, what do I hear as the emotions in them? And what does that stir up in me? So we're listening with our head and our heart. We're also listening with our hands, because when we hear a story, we're being changed by it. We're being given a gift. So what did I learn that about them and their underlying strengths, values, but what do I know now that empowers me to perhaps do something different? Either understand more about myself or about the world, about other, that now is important to me that I will use. And when you can witness and reflect back to another what I learned from you in your story, you're giving them a gift back. We usually rush right to questions. Oh, that's interesting, I want to know more here. Questions should come last, because what we're doing is when we ask a question, it's important to understand more deeply, but we're now taking control of their story and moving it in the direction that we care about. Sometimes the first question I ask when I've heard someone's story is to say, first of all, I'll say, oh, what more might you tell me? That's a question, but it's giving the power to them. The second question I sometimes ask is, what would be a good question for me to ask you right now? You'd be surprised what people will say. Oh, I wish you'd ask me about this, which I never would have thought of. But it allows them to share more of their story and go deeper. So as you are a story listener for others, think, how can I reflect back as a gift what I heard as the most important messages, how I was moved or touched, or where I hear the places where they're moved or touched, what I've learned from you, and if then you have a question, you're free to ask. So I'm going to give you, whoops, let me go back. 10 minutes total. And what I ask is I'm going to put a timer on and let you know when 5 minutes is up. So to let the focus be on one of you for 5 minutes, and then to change places and let the focus be on the other one for 5 minutes, so that you each have a chance to tell your story thoroughly and to be heard thoroughly and to perhaps have some reflections back. This is something we don't give ourselves very often. We just go in dialogue so fast. Let this be storytelling and story listening of the story of who I am and why I'm here and what my mission is. Are there questions from any of you? So if each of you can just find a partner. This question?
Won't it be easier if we just tell what we understood from the story instead of the person or the listener to interpret what we are trying to tell him?
So, great question. Thank you. This is part of Johari's window. We tell them what we are saying. They're receiving something that we don't even know or understand. So to let them just reflect back on what they heard actually opens us to have a thicker story about ourselves. Like, oftentimes you'll say, you heard that in me? I will set people up and people will think, oh, I don't know, I'm not good at something, or whatever. Then they'll tell their story and they'll hear back from another, I saw you strong here. I saw how change you made. And you think, that was in my story? You saw that in me? It's how we can ourselves move from a story that we're in our heads all the time to hear it reflected back from another opens us even to our own stories. So I invite you to try it and to see what happens. All right? So for the next 15 seconds, I want you each just to find a partner, and when you have a partner, just raise your hands. So I make sure everyone here has a partner. So just turn to somebody next to you, make sure everybody has somebody that they're talking to. Does everyone have a partner? If you don't have a partner, raise your hand. You're together? Does anyone not have a partner? So there's one gentleman who needs a partner still. So you're set now. All right. So everyone knows who they're going to speak to. All right. This first speaker to go, this is going to be tricky, is the one with the darker colored shirt or the shorter hair. How's that? So, that way you just, so does everyone know who's going to go first now? Because I don't want you to waste any time saying, oh, you go, no, you go. So before you begin, come back to silence. I invite each of you to take a breath through your nose and then exhale slowly through your mouth. If you breathe in for 3 and out for 6, you'll begin to find that calm presence within you. And that's, you want to speak from that place of presence so that your listener is feeling held. And as a listener, you want to be a calm receiver so that your storyteller feels comfortable and is willing to open to you in their story. So presence is not only in the teller, it's in the receiver. And our breath can bring us to that place of calm, of holding, of being in a loving place, of letting the other know, whether you are the speaker or the listener, that you are valued. So I invite you to try that, whatever role you're in with the other now, to be in that place of full presence, of both receiving and giving. And your breath will take you there. So a breath is had. You know who your partners are. So I'll set the timer now for 5 minutes. And first teller, begin. is time now to change partners. The first 5 minutes is up, so if let the other speaker bring whatever story you have to a close and then switch, and I'll be back with you in 5 minutes. and bring it to a close. You finish your sentence? So you've had 5 minutes to be a teller of your story and hear some reflections back, and you've had 5 minutes to be a listener, a deep listener, a witness to others in their story. So I ask you to reflect for a moment. What was it like to tell when it was a story that you were just had a dedicated listener? And what was it like to listen? What happened for you? Did any learning come about yourself in your own story or others? Any reflections? Please. Yes.
First, what will I think is that initially it felt like 5 minutes would be too much time, but then once we start speaking, we realize that 5 minutes is very less time actually, and we have so much to tell, and it is very interesting to listen to them. So it is really interesting to learn and tell stories.
For those who are extroverts, 5 minutes is you just getting through the context. And for those who are introverts, you think 5 minutes, oh, give me a break. But once you get into story flow and story mode, it's timeless. And there's always more that can be shared. And story, that's what story does in our brain. It takes us out of that logical, linear place and opens up worlds to us. And especially when we have somebody who brings the presence to their listening, it opens doors in us to actually hear ourselves. And that's what a gift of a coach or a mentor is actually a dedicated listener in presence. And they have no magic wisdom. They actually are present with us in a way that it connects us to our own wisdom and our own knowledge. And that's the gift we can give each other in storytelling and story listening. Thank you. How about others in reflections? Please. Oh, could we get the mic so that we might hear you better?
Ma'am, I would like to know how to maintain a flow in the story to make the person interacted on what you are speaking. How to maintain a flow on the story, like in the story, like if they keep the person interacted, because some pointers come like we think that is making the story interacted, but the person who's listening to the story might get bored of it. So how to maintain that pace?
So that's a good story. That's a good question about story and what goes into a story to keep people interested. So I'll take that as a cue to move into this next part. We still have about 20 minutes together, so let's talk about what happens inside a story and how do we actually keep somebody interested in it. So story involves, as I said, change and some level of suspense, and what suspense is about is not knowing what's going to happen next. If you think about all the things that go into a story, actually I want to begin by taking a step back. The most important element of any story is actually the character, the main character. If we don't care about the character, then we don't care what happens to them. So we're not invested. So when we set up a story where first we learn about this character and what this character wants, so that's where we're learning about the character's goals and the motivator. Why is this goal important to this character? So just in setting up this context, we're beginning to set up what's interesting. So first of all, I care about the character. I see what the character wants and why it's important. And actually, the higher the stakes are for this character, the more the listener is invested in the character, in the outcome. So for instance, the goal is, I want to go to business school. And, I don't really need to go, but I'm sort of interested. And it's as opposed to, I'm going to go to business school because many reasons. I want to support my family. I want to make a change in this place in the world, and I know that these skills will help me help others to do this. When you realize the goals are meaningful to you and the motives are important, then you care about what happens. Nothing comes easily. So when we get to this middle part of the story, so what made it hard to do this? Those are the challenges. Those are the obstacles. Those we see, this is where the listener can also identify. I've tried to reach some goals too. I've struggled. It hasn't, how did you do it? Which leads us to the middle part, the bottom. Let me see if I just have on my, no, I thought I had broken out the middle part into a bigger slide, but hopefully you can see. Underneath where it says challenges and turning points, those 4 boxes, I want to talk about those for a moment, because most people, when they talk about storytelling, don't break it down into this, but for leadership, I want you to understand these 4 boxes. We have, outside of ourselves, resources. So that upper left-hand box, external allies, there's always helpers in a story. If you think about any traditional or historic tale, the hero's never alone, and even when they think they are, then somebody magically appears, and the hero doesn't always listen to them. And you can see how some other characters actually don't listen, and that's the end of them. But the hero often is the one who does listen to the external helpers, because that's how the hero of the story thickens their story. When they just go about their own reactions of, oh, I don't like this old gnome or this old witch. What are they telling me? Go away. And they stay in their thin story of this person can't be helpful, and I know what I'm doing, and I'm going to go. That's a thin story, and they usually end up either losing the girl or losing the treasure or losing their lives. So it's the character in the story who uses the external resources, who pauses to listen and to say, who can help me now? Who can I trust now? Who can be an ally? That's when a hero starts to move through those challenges in a different way. There are also outside external challengers who sometimes are tricksters, meaning they say, I'm going to help you here. Take this pill so you can stay up all night studying so you can do really well on your exam. That might be a trickster. So they're there. Sometimes those external challengers we think are not helpful, but actually they are the ones who push us in ways that stretch us. That's that teacher who doesn't give you more than a C over and over again, and you think, I need to get away from this person, but actually that's the class you do your best work in because you are pushed. So to realize, who are my external helpers? Who are my challengers? When are those challengers helpers, and when are they not? All of these elements are in your traditional tales. They're in your life as well. So there's also all this going on outside. There's a lot going on inside. You have your internal allies. What's that? Your internal allies are many things. One is they're all the stories you have ever heard that bring you the wisdom and knowledge and values that you stand on now. All of that's in you. If you pause and listen, what do I already know that could be helpful to me right now? Also, your internal allies are your skills, your capabilities, your competencies, what you physically know how to do. And to pause and to say, wait a minute, what can I do? So it's, what do I know? Head, what can I do? Heart, what do I feel? How do I rely on my ethos, my pathos, my logos within to move through these challenges in this story? And it would be grand if that was all that was going on in your head, but it's not, because you also have your internal challengers, which are your self-saboteurs, which are the stories that are thin stories you hold about yourself of, I'm going to fail this class because I'm not good at it, or I never understand this, or I don't like this, or I don't like that person, so I'm not going to listen, or those are all internal stories that we carry that undermine us in moving through our challenges and obstacles. So the more that we know those, acknowledge them, and when those stories are coming up, we challenge them to say, wait a minute, yes, this is hard for me. I'm going to struggle here, but I'm going to find the external resources. I'm going to rely on what's inside of me, and I'm going to continue to try. That's the hero that says, all right, I'm going to go to the 8th mountain and climb it in order to get the wisdom I need to bring back in order to achieve this task. That's where the stories, the traditional stories, have all the clues for you that translate into your story that you're living now. When we are aware of those boxes and interact with them in a way that moves us through the story, then we come to the resolution. Our story is never over, but there are pauses of this moment where there is change, and to acknowledge what that change is outside of us, what's different. Maybe I got that C, or maybe I worked hard and I got that B. Maybe I failed that course and I'm going to take it over because I believe I can do it. That's the change outside. The transformation is what happens inside. What do I know now that I didn't know before? And how will that learning and change within me lead me to enter the next story differently? And that's the future story, the vision story. We're always at the beginning of a story, which is the end of the last story, and it's the end of the last story that fuels us if we pause and we take those lessons in, that give us the means to step into the next story differently, more aware, more knowledge, stronger, clearer, more connected. So I was talking with one of your esteemed professors earlier about the idea of resilience and what that is and what that looks like in a story. It has to do with these boxes. So these boxes are, I'm going to put them into words that begin with C. So the first is your connections. So who are your allies? Who are you when things are hard and you're discouraged or disappointed or feel like I can't do this? First think of my connections. Who am I connected to who can support me and help me? Who do I need to hear from right now? Who do I need to tell my story to right now in order to get perspective? So to think, who are my allies? Who am I connected to? What stories do I need to hear from them to give me the wisdom to know how to step into what's next? The second C has to do with the internal allies. It's your competencies. So when we are discouraged and low, we forget what we have and what we can do. We lose touch with it. So to reconnect ourselves to what am I capable of? What are my competencies? Also within that, internally, what are my passions? What brings me joy? How do I reconnect to that to build myself back up, that I have the courage, that's a third one, to step back in. The third, so there's connections, there's competencies. The third is called count, but it has to do with what is important to me. It's your personal mission. What difference am I making here? How is my voice, my story making a difference? To know that each one of you is invaluable, is bringing gifts to this world, that you count, that your work matters, that you have to persist because what you do is important. And that leads to the courage to keep going. So resilience is made up of these C's: being connected, knowing your competencies, knowing that your work counts, it matters, and to find the courage to step back in, to reinflate yourself, to move forward in what you're doing. So let me just move on. If we had another hour, I would ask you to tell a story of a time when you were challenged. How did you get through it? So think through, these are the story parts. What's the beginning context? What were things like before this challenge happened? What was your point of change? What led you into the middle of your story? Did you jump? Meaning you wanted a challenge, you went for it, like entering this school was a challenge you took on. Sometimes a challenge, more often than not, is a push, meaning something came into your life that you did not want, but now you're here and you have to deal with that. Those are the conflicts we're in. Those are illnesses. Those are the difficult moments of, I didn't see this coming, I didn't want it, but now I'm here. Or it might be that you jumped into a course and now you're in it and you realize this is not what I expected, and it's a challenge that I didn't see coming and I don't know how I'm going to get through it. Those are moments when you look at, all right, did I jump or was I pushed? But what did I want to have happen? That's your goal. What do I want to make happen here? And then why is that important to me? We often get caught in the goal, but we don't go deeper to the motive. And within ourselves, what motivates us? Why is this important? What ethics or values am I standing on that I choose to engage in this challenge to get to the other side? That's in our own stories, but when we also listen to it in others, when we're in a management position, and we know with our employees where their challenges are, where they're struggling, but what's important to them and why. Then we can begin to support them in their story, to be the ally in their story, to help them through those challenges. So then, all right, what, inside or outside, stands between me and where I want to be? And to know that it's never only outside, it's always inside as well. And that's how we grow. That's how we change. If we're not challenged, we're static. So welcoming these challenges, knowing what is it drawing from me inside, what am I learning about myself, what's being called upon from me, who can I get help from outside, because we're never meant to do it alone, and how can they be of support to me, how can I utilize that, and then where, those are the resources inside and out. And then to take that pause when you get to even a resting point, like after that exam or the end of that course, to look back and to think, how did I get here? How did I do this? Who do I need to thank? What do I need to own within myself that enabled me to get here? And what did I learn through going through this that will bring me to the next place so that I can do it stronger? So what's possible now because I've lived through this today? So we are always in a story, and at the end to think, so what am I grateful to know? Why is that important to me? How does it fit into my larger story? What might be possible? And who else might benefit from hearing this story? So that's where you're starting to collect your own story banks of moments in your life that when you become a manager, you may find that traditional tale to tell, but you may find that personal story that can be so helpful to another to know, I've been there, I understand this is what helped me, and that they can take from your story what might be helpful to them. We are always having things come at us that we don't have control over. We're always moving into a new story, and we're always given choices about what do I need to leave behind, what am I bringing forward, and what am I creating anew as I evolve my story into the future. We're always in the process, as we grow, of evolving our beliefs, our values, our passions, our skills. They're changing, they're evolving. That's what growth is. And we realize it through our stories that we are living. So to pause and to find those so that it will influence how we show up next into the next story. What do I know now? What do I care about? And what are my values in action? Because that's the stories we are living as we move into the future story. As we impact our world, we're also being changed by it. And to notice where those changes are happening, and to embrace them, to integrate them, and to continue to let your story grow and build as it moves into your future story. Lastly, I just want to give you an idea of this. It will be in your handouts, is the vision story that we hold. That when you have created this vision for yourself, you're more apt to actually grow into that story. It's important to have a vision story that you're always evolving. So to think, first, the context, what's good now, but what could be better? What do I want to have happen? Why is that important to me? And then, what makes it hard? What stands between me and that? What is blocking me inside? Those are the thin stories about, oh, I can't do that. I shouldn't be dreaming that. I shouldn't want to be with them. That's thin stories. Challenge those thin stories. Thicken those thin stories. And then to look at action steps. What's a first step? Breaking that story down into the small pieces. And then what do I have inside, helpers outside and strengths and resources inside that can move me through those challenges to get to the change I want to have happen and to gain that knowledge of how I'm being changed inside. When I work in organizations with leaders, the vision story is one of the most important pieces. It's first, who am I? What's important to me? And where do I want to bring it and why? That's the vision that puts the mission in action, that leads other people to want to be with you and work with you and join your story of where it's going. When I'm working in a place like Novartis and they're making a pitch, it's actually a vision story. It's, I have done this, yes, but where do I want it to go? And why do I want you to join me either with your money, your resources, your support in order to bring this vision to life? And more often than not, we are pitching ourselves. And to know what your vision is and why it's important and to share that story in a way that inspires others, that will lead you to have your vision actually come true. So I want to pause here, and we have just a couple of minutes left to see again if there are questions, reflections, anything that you would like to share with me and with others before we say goodbye. Let's see what else I have. Please. Yes.
And I want to understand that how the objective or the outcome actually impacts the storytelling. And if it, for example, if I'm telling a story, I want an outcome for the person. So,
Hello.
So if I understand your question, it's how does the end point actually impact the whole story? Is that right?
yeah, ma'am, like if we are trying to make sure we are shifting the line of the story or the cause of the story just so that the audience understands the depth.
Yeah.
So, like, how the degree of impact actually happens
Yeah.
with the objective or the outcome for our story
Yeah.
and our storytelling.
Yeah. So there are different levels of this story, and you're right, there's the beginning, middle, and end the end is the outcome. It's the resolution. And so often we just say, happy ending, or, sad ending, and we move on. So the work is really then to take it down to that next level. What led to that outcome? And with that outcome, what's different now, and what have we learned? And when we have that conversation, and you don't need to put it all into the story because people will get it themselves. So if you think of the old parables, they always end, and the moral of the story is, for children, so like the rabbit and the hare, that the rabbit kept saying, I have plenty of time, and the tortoise kept quietly moving along. And so the moral of the story, so the outcome is the turtle wins, right? The moral of the story is persevere and don't take your eye off your goal and keep moving in small steps ahead. So, but there perhaps is more underneath. And when we allow ourselves to take that pause to reflect of, how does this speak to me in my life? Where can I take this learning in a moment and help me to be more of the tortoise than the hare? When am I more like the hare? These are the kinds of conversations that we can have with each other that help us understand more of who we are in connection to the stories that come to us, and how we can use them to deepen our own self-understanding or understanding of other or the world and how it works, that empowers us. Stories empower us to step into our lives and our relationships with more informed, deeper ways. From the very simple, old traditional tales to stories of who we are and listening to each other. So yes, the beginning, middle, end are important, but what's going on underneath, and how does that touch us, move us, change us? Those are the conversations I also invite you to have. So one last slide, and then I think we need to end. It's not easy. You're always in the middle of a story. Joseph Campbell, who was a mythologist, I love this line: if the path before you is clear, you're probably on someone else's. Let your story unfold, jump into it like an adventure, continue to be curious, to listen, to learn, to grow through sharing and listening your stories. Thank you for welcoming me here today to be with you. Thank you, Dr. Thank you.
To begin with, I just have two words to say. Thank you. However, the thank you note sometimes is very difficult to give, but I think it's important for me to thank the organizers, Suma, our head, Dr. A.K. Sengupta, and all the student volunteers who have made this program successful. Not to forget the link between the organizers and the speaker is Usha ma'am. Usha ma'am, thank you very much for all this. I think today's session was a reflection to all of us to ask a fundamental question. We know. But what do we do to this no? And I think you have made it so beautifully, explained it so well, that we know something, but articulation is very important. And I think articulation can only come with the art of storytelling. The leaders who are the harbingers of change need to also understand that internal reflection is the key for everything. I think, Lani, the session was amazing, and I thank you immensely for the wonderful session on behalf of the students and on behalf of SIS College of Management Studies and SIS School of Business Studies. Thank you very much.